The events of this week, I'm sure you've all heard some of the news, left me very frustrated and confused and a little sick to my stomach and sad. So I'd like to speak to the issue of racism tonight, something that we've discussed as a community over the last year. We've had a number of speakers and several more to come. But before we talk about racism, I'd like to talk about gay people. So I fully support the LGBT community. My brother is gay. I proudly officiated at his wedding. I teach my children that anyone can love anyone, and boys can marry boys, and girls can marry girls. Now, I'm not gay. I'm heterosexual. And I'm comfortable admitting that I don't really get what it means to be gay. Like, I don't know that experience. I've never felt ashamed of my sexual orientation. I was never in denial of it. I've never had anyone tell me I should be ashamed of my choice to marry a woman. I've never been denied a job or lost a job on the basis of my sexual orientation, perceived or otherwise. I've never been physically harmed because I am straight. And yet, I don't deny that these things happen to other people. My brother, my friends who are gay, have shared with me their experiences of bias, of rejection, of shame, fear, and they've tried to convey to me what their experience of the world was like growing up gay. And though I don't see the world through their eyes, I try my best to take at face value that all of these thoughtful and intelligent people are not making it up. I don't experience homophobia myself, but I also don't deny that it's out there in the world. I found in the discussions around race as a white person in what is a majority white community, certainly in the United States, a very difficult challenge in talking about race. And I've even read about this challenge. White people don't like to talk about race because there is a distinct admission of guilt that seems to come along with the conversation. That if we are in the majority, if we are the benefactors of implicit bias in our favor, and certain privileges that we are not aware of and don't necessarily ask for but receive nonetheless, that then, if we are to admit that there is in fact a problem for those in our nation that are not white, that it's our fault. That is a challenging thing to come to for any person. No one wants to take the burdens of 250 years or 300 years of slavery and institutional racism and carry that on your own shoulders. At the same time, to avoid it or to deny the problem only exacerbates the issue. I start with the issue of being gay and homophobia because it's a lot easier, it seems like. We have come to a place, gay marriage is legal throughout the country, and I think we've come to a place where we can recognize that there is a different experience sometimes growing up gay and in dealing with how the world interacts with you on that basis. But when it comes to race, we want to deny that there is a difference, I think. And I'm not speaking about everyone, and I'm not making any accusations yet, but there is a problem. I have no idea what it is like to be not white. I have, personally, all of the privileges that our society can confer implicitly on a person. I am white, I am straight, and I am male. I won the genetic lottery. I have never experienced violence at the hands of the police. On the contrary, I've been given the benefit of the doubt and even an act of kindness on those, I admit, rare occasions when I've been pulled over. I've never faced discrimination because of the way I look or dress or talk. Honestly, in cantorial school, they often point to it being a benefit to be a male cantor who's married with kids. Whether or not congregations do it on purpose or not, many prefer that normal heteronormative box. I don't fear daily bodily harm in the same way that black people do in this country. And though I don't experience it myself, I'm going to start from the premise that blacks do experience daily racism and discrimination. That is what I hear in their stories and in their voices, is what I see in the news. One cannot watch the stories of Michael Brown, whose the anniversary of his death is Sunday, or the stories this week of Alton Sterling or Philandro Castile, and not conclude that something is going on. There is something unique, horribly unique, about the experience of black men and women in this country. That is what Black Lives Matter means. If anyone says to you, well, all lives matter, you should give them a scornful look for saying something so obvious. Of course, all lives matter. Our tradition teaches that all lives matter. But there is no silent only in front of the phrase Black Lives Matter. It isn't saying that only Black Lives Matter. Rather, it's a response to the experience or the perception that in America, black lives don't matter. There are a lot of problems in this world, everywhere, all the time. To focus on one is not to reject or deny the others. By speaking about racism, I am not negating issues around Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the bombing in Iraq or poverty in Philadelphia. But there is a problem, and it goes to the heart of our nation and its founding. We might disagree about the pervasiveness of racism in this country. We might disagree about how to fix the issue. But I think we need to move past arguing about its existence. This is also not a sermon about vilifying the police. 5 police officers lost their lives in Dallas, and their lives are mourned as much as anyone else's is mourned. This is not about vilifying any individual officer in any individual case, but there is something different that happens when a black person is pulled over than when a white person is pulled over. When a black person is found with a gun on his person, even if it's legal, even if they're licensed, than if the same thing happens to a white person. That is a problem. Now, whether or not we point to institutional racism, we point to individual policemen having an issue, whether it's about training, there's a problem. And you might ask, and I do this all the time, what am I supposed to do? I am a white person. I don't know what to do. I read up and I looked for answers on what to do, and I have some suggestions. The first suggestion that came up was about education, about educating oneself. I recently read a book, and I highly recommend it, called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's a black man, and he writes it in the format of a letter to his son. It is beautifully written, and it is heartbreaking. What I appreciated most about the book, which almost reads like poetry at times, is that it helped me understand the perspective of being a black man in this country, more than stories about racism or the stories about the deaths this week. It helped me understand what his perception is, what the problems are, and what it is like to go through his experience. If you prefer books that are a little more data heavy, I've been told that Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is an enlightening read. But I say educate yourself and start from the perspective that it's true. That America is in fact built on racism and carries that legacy today. Then read and see where the facts take you. The second suggestion that came up in my research was about being aware of racist tropes about black victims. When someone looks for reasons why a victim of police brutality deserved to be killed, you know that the conversation has officially changed. When you hear he shouldn't have run, or he had a history of priors, or anything about black-on-black crime, they're all ways of deflecting from a necessary conversation about how the police reacts and responds to black people differently than to white people. If you aren't sure about this particular point, ask yourself, under what circumstances would you find it acceptable, perhaps understandable, for a friend of yours, or a child, or husband or wife, to be pulled over while driving, or to be playing in a park, and end up dead, shot by the police? Under what circumstances would you say that was justified? Would you say, well, my husband was very rude to the policeman, so it made sense for him to be shot? Or would you say, well, my daughter legally owns a gun and had it on her in the car. I mean, if you're going to have a gun in the car, you deserve to be shot. And if you think I'm being hyperbolic, go back and read about the last year. Educate yourself. Be aware of racist tropes. And the third suggestion that came up was talk to other people about it and why it matters. It's a conversation to have with your kids, with your friends, with your family. On some of the parenting blogs that I read on occasion, it talked about the necessity of having an explicit conversation with white children about what to do when a friend of theirs who is black gets confronted by the police, or gets in a situation with an authority figure, about standing with them, about staying with them, about recognizing that that is not the moment for trying something new out, that even though your child might be okay, your friend might not, doing the exact same thing. More than just talking with people about it being sad or it being tragic, educate yourself and then talk to people about what you read. Assume that the stories you hear are as tragic and honest and awful as they sound. It is not necessary to vilify, to jump to conclusions, to incite violence, and yet it is necessary to accept that something is going on that is important and worth talking about. If you get that far, where you have read up on the issues, you have made yourself aware, you understand the history of our country from a different perspective, and if you get that far and you think, well, honestly, I'm okay with it. Maybe it is racism, maybe it's pervasive, but it's not my problem. To that I say, go back to our history. Read about the expulsion from Spain. Read about the Holocaust. Heck, just read what people are saying about Jews on Twitter today. Go back to our tradition and the teaching that to kill a person is akin to destroying the entire world. Read about how the early rabbis looked at the Torah's explicit calls for the death penalty, and how anyways, despite that, they set up a legal system that goes to tremendous lengths to ensure that almost no one could ever be executed. Those early rabbis took the Torah very literally, really literally. And yet in this one instance, they felt it was a mistake. That the death penalty, that any crime that someone might commit should cause them to deserve death, is actually a mistake. I admit, I don't feel like ending this very nicely. In our tradition, we have what's called the nechemta, the moment of comfort. When you read Torah and you choose your selection, what you're going to read, you're supposed to end on a nice note. You're never supposed to end on one where God is cursing or punishing. You're supposed to end on a nechemta. But I struggle with the nechemta. I struggle with the prayer for peace because I don't want us to rely on God to bring that peace. Earlier in the service, we read the quote from Martin Buber, "Act as if there is no God and it all relies on you." This is a moment where I truly believe it actually all depends on us. It depends on each one of us making a choice to see the world through another's eyes, to live in their shoes, to understand the history that our world was built on, and then to talk about it, and to bring those issues up. Bring it up on Facebook. Bring it up on Twitter. Bring it up over lunch or dinner. It seems strange, and yet these are the news events that are happening every day. If you didn't have one conversation about what happened in Falcon Heights or in Dallas or in Baton Rouge this week, I would be surprised. And that's our duty, to act as if there is no God tonight and tomorrow, and instead to move forward with a commitment to taking action ourselves. And even if it's just reading a book and understanding the situation better, it's a step in the right direction. We, many of us here, are white and get the benefits of that knowledge. Once upon a time, by the way, none of us were. Jews weren't white when they first came to the country. They were ethnic. They became white, if you believe it, in the 40s, in the 50s. And the assimilation into modern culture. But that wasn't us once upon a time. But now we have this benefit, and it is worth taking the time to understand what it means to us and to others.